inside now. Thomas Hearns is an open book for Ray Leonard. Backs up against the ropes.
This is one of the most unusual calls by a referee in the history of the sport.
The first loss. A tremendous victory. Leonard fighting off the ropes.
It happened. It happened. An uppercut by Douglas. Down goes Tyson.
Hooks right hand shot.
Excellent. Knocks out Mike Tyson.
Slumps to the canvas.
The champion struggles to stay on his feet.
How do you like it? How do you like it?
Welcome, fight fans, to another episode of BTR Boxing Podcast Legendary Nights. And on today's episode, as voted for by you, the listeners and followers on Twitter, this is the tale of Chris Eubank versus Michael Watson from 1991. So this is the tale of Chris Eubank versus Michael Watson from back in 1991 for the WBO Middleweight Championship of the World. Johnston, a fight you've always wanted to talk about on the podcast, and yet it comes up in the polls, gets voted for, and here we are.
It's another classy domestic dust-up really between, two of the best three Brits that are around at the time, and obviously both guys had beaten Nigel Benn before the first one, and for me, I actually think Michael Watson probably just about ahead of him, really, in my opinion. I think he was just a little bit more skillful, a little bit more knowledgeable and ring savvy. So it was a really nice fight. Obviously, he had his defeat, which we're going to go through anyway. But yeah, it was a great dust up. Another great domestic fight in the early 90s.
It certainly was, and it's very close to the Eubank Ben one that we did for Legendary Nights not too long ago. So if you've not already checked that out, please go and look in the feed and you will find that episode. If you want to listen to that before you start getting into this episode, I would strongly advise it because it will set you up nicely for what we're about to talk about here in this episode. So as always, we will go through the careers of both men leading up to this particular fight. We'll talk about Chris Eubank, we'll talk about Michael Watson, we will talk about the build up to the fight, we'll talk about the fight itself, and as always we will cover off the aftermath of what this fight meant for these two fighters and what it meant for boxing as well. So going into careers then, let's talk about Michael Watson first. He was the challenger for the WBO middleweight title in this fight, and obviously we're talking on the basis of we was quite young when these fights were happening, so we're talking quite retrospectively for this episode because it's not something we was probably well versed with at the time. So looking back on the research and looking back on the stuff that we've done prior to this episode, Michael Watson had a really good apprenticeship before he had this world title shot, and one of the notable sort of fights I look back on when I was looking back through Watson's career was his fights with Ben and McCallum in particular, because I felt like this was where he really came to the forefront of the middleweight scene in boxing, because obviously he'd been working his way up fighting domestic opponents with relatively losing records or 50-50 records, building that apprenticeship up to get himself ready for an opportunity. And his first major fight came in 1989 when he faced off against another one of them three middleweights that you alluded to earlier, which was Nigel Benn at Finsbury Park. 21st of May 1989 he faced off against Nigel Benn, who was 22-0 at the time. And I tell you what, man, that's another fight. If you haven't seen it, we implore you to go and watch it, because the trilogies between these fighters, the Benns Watsons, the Eubank Benns, they were absolute fantastic pioneering fights of British boxing in that particular era. But going back to that particular fight with Nigel Benn, that was a cracking fight, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a really good fight. Obviously Ben was the knockout artist. He was the one going in as the pretty much a big favourite. Most people expected him to get rid of Watson, I think. But Ben sort of went on that seek and destroy on an early mission against Watson, and it didn't serve him too well. He really went for it, and obviously just blew a gasket. He blew himself out, and the fourth round in particular was one for the ages. It was just in the end, Ben actually was stunned as well in that round. But it was just one of those fights where it could have gone either way, I suppose. Obviously, Ben's come out, he's tried to take out Watson early, literally gassed out, and Watson just worked behind the jab like he does, and he does so skillfully. He had that sort of upright stance, and he would just throw that jab out and try and follow it up with a right. And he didn't get overwhelmed with what Ben was doing. He almost sort of felt that he knew Ben was going to tire at some point. And he ended up getting rid of him in the sixth. And it was a jab. Weirdly, he put him down with a jab, but it was more to do with Ben. Obviously, the punishment he had received during the fight, he had dished out, and basically he was just knackered, absolutely cream crackered. And eventually that was what ended the fight. But really good performance from Watson. And it was a fight where Mike McCallum was in the horizon, and he got the better of Ben that night and put Ben, his first defeat. Obviously, Ben got stopped as well, something he'd never experienced before in his career. So Ben, it was back to the drawing board for him. But for Watson, it was moving on for that WBA title against Mike McCallum.
Also on that particular card was a young Johnny Nelson, who was 13-5 at the time, fighting for the British Cruiserweight title, which he subsequently won on the same night as Nigel Benn versus Michael Watson. A little known fact for people there who may not know about that, but yeah, Johnny Nelson, good old Mr. Johnny Nelson from Sky, the man that comes out with some of the greatest one-line comments in commentary of the fights, and yeah, he was on the same bill, 1989, 21st of May. So you talking about that McCallum fight then, that was where his big test came, because obviously he'd put himself up to the world level to fight Mike McCallum, who by all respects he was a little bit of a killer in the ring. The guy was really vicious in the ring, and he was a guy that had completely done fantastic things throughout the 1980s. Mike McCallum started his career in 1981. He was just on a string of KOs, TKOs. If you look back through his record, it's absolutely ridiculous to see how much of a big puncher Mike McCallum really was. So there was a lot of obviously reservations going into this fight for Michael Watson, because Mike McCallum had beat Lloyd Honeyghan, who beat Donald Curry. So there's a name that people will remember, because that was one of the biggest upsets in boxing history, when obviously Lloyd Honeyghan went over to America and beat Donald Curry. So Donald Curry was a resume, a part of his resume. Then another name on his resume that people will also know, two more, Harold the Bomber Graham. He also beat him to win the vacant WBA title on a split decision against Harold Graham in 1989. And then before the Michael Watson fight, he defended his title against Steve Collins. So Mike McCallum's resume going into the fight with Michael Watson was, this guy is legitimately a really good fighter. He's a class champion. He's beaten all the fantastic prospects and well-versed fighters out there, and he was a massive underdog going into this fight, Watson, but he went in there and he absolutely gave it his all.
He did, Watson. He put everything on the line, and as you say, Mike McCallum, just beating Steve Collins' first defeat of his career, beat Harold Graham, who had only lost one fight itself, and as you've also alluded to, Donald Curry. But he was a huge favourite, and credit to Mike McCallum for actually coming over to England to fight Watson as well. But yeah, Watson, obviously he had the one defeat early in his career, which was against James Cook, and he did. In the end of the day, he put a good account of himself, but those body shots really took effect, and Mike McCallum targeted the body, and he showed weaknesses in Watson's armoury. But it was as I said, it was a good performance in terms of he pushed himself as much as he probably could. But Mike McCallum was just a bit of a league above, and yeah, he got rid of him eventually, knocked him out, didn't he? He knocked him out in the 11th round of 12 at Royal Albert Hall. So unlucky for Watson, but back to drawing board for him now, and Ben, who was sort of trying to start his resurgence, and obviously Eubank ticking along nicely. So the three of them, although Eubank hadn't been beaten, Ben obviously had the one defeat against Watson. It was all sort of, they were coming together. You knew there was going to be more fights ahead, and Eubank was the other guy coming through. So yeah, unfortunate for Watson. He didn't quite get that performance he needed, but it happens, unfortunately, and as I say, he had already lost one fight. He had drawn with Israel Cole as well, so he knew he had to, he could dust himself off and go again.
Yeah, it certainly could, and obviously he came back and beat another well-notable British name in Errol Christie in November of 1990. Then he went on to beat Craig Trotter for the Commonwealth Middleweight title, and then he went on to beat Anthony Brown, and then this is where we get the Eubank fight. He comes in against Chris Eubank. So he'd had the experience at the top level at this point, and as you rightly pointed out, he took a defeat at the highest level against, you know, the man that was, I'd say, was probably the king of middleweights at that time, at that moment in time. Yeah. He was the guy to beat. He was the number one of the division, 100%, and he'd had that experience. And what we will talk about later on down the line in the actual fight breakdown is that he'd learnt a lot from that loss to McCallum, and as we talk through the fight later, we'll actually be able to allude back to that, because there's a few things that he'd learnt from the fight itself with McCallum that he started to look to use in the fight with Eubank. So that was quite an interesting prospect, and something that the commentators alluded to throughout the process of the fight. But moving on to Eubank's career, of course, and we've covered a lot of Eubank's career on the previous episode when we did the Eubank Ben fight, so I don't want to touch too much onto that particular career, because we did a bit of a breakdown on that in the Eubank Ben. So if you do want to hear our breakdown of Chris Eubank's career leading up to the fight with Ben, then go back and listen to that one. So quickly leading into the fight then with Michael Watson, obviously at this point he'd had his biggest fight against Nigel Benn in 1990, the previous year, and then he defended his title twice, once against Dan Sherry, once against Gary Stretch, and then the fight was made with Michael Watson. And a lot was to be said about it, because it was essentially a British grudge match. It's what turned into a British grudge match more than anything. It was the two British guys, one London, one from Brighton, you know, very close proximity to each other. Bragging rights was up for grabs here, not just the WBO Middleweight title. There was a lot on the line here between these two. So Eubank had already had this epic fight with Nigel Benn the previous year, in which he picked up the victory, and he was another man. He was behind McCallum at the time. He was probably the other man in the division to beat, because he'd held the WBO title at that moment in time. So we talk about Eubank going into this fight, he already had that experience of being in big fights, especially big British fights, when he faced Nigel Benn. So he was already ready for a fight like this, and his style and his arrogance always played through from the moment he stepped foot in the ring to the moment he stepped foot at the press conferences. He was always really, really arrogant, and going into the build-up for this was no different.
Oh, it's exactly the same, wasn't he? You know, Watson was obviously different to Ben in his attitude. He was well liked, Watson. He had a good manner about him, and he didn't really get into anything with Eubank.
I'm glad that the man believes in his own hype. You know, he's foolish enough to take this fight, and I don't think he realises what he's up against. And, you know, my skills are far more superior than his, and you will know that on June the 22nd. If you don't mind, can you take those silly glasses off as well? You know, it's not that bright now.
Eubank was sort of just dismissing him like he would always do with all of his opponents. But it was going to be an interesting fight, because obviously with Watson, you know, sort of recovering, he actually fought on the undercard against Errol Christie of Ben Eubank as well, the first one in 1990. So he was obviously, you know, he had those 3 defeats leading into the fight. I mean, 3 wins leading into the fight after the McCallum loss. But yeah, Eubank, his usual cocky self, wasn't he? If I remember rightly, I haven't got it down, but Watson was basically saying he's just going to go out there and he's going to do a job on Eubank, and he's going to beat him with skill and with just that ability and knowledge that he had learned in his career already.
Yeah, there was a lot of posturing, as always, from Chris Eubank in the lead up to this, and for what little footage you can actually get access to on the internet, you can actually see just another typical Eubank interview, really. And when you go and check it out, you'll sit there, you'll either love it or you'll hate it, because the guy was literally the living proof of Marmite. He was the guy that everybody loved to hate. He was the pantomime villain, and this was no different. People like Watson because of Watson's style. He was come forward, he was aggressive, he'd give it his all, whereas Eubank at times, he was very much, he'd be a little bit lackadaisy in fights. He'd fight on the back foot a lot, he'd counterpunch, but it was only really when he was in these testing moments where you'd see the best of Chris Eubank as well. And going into that fight in a few moments, that was no different in this particular fight. A lot of posturing, a lot of the the showmanship, a lot of the walking around the ring, posturing between rounds. It's just something that he's always going to be known for. And like I say, you either love it or you hate it, and it's your own preference as to what you think about all that. But in the build up to this, he was just being as overconfident as always. You know, he's saying he was going to defend his title quite comfortably against a limited opponent, which was quite disrespectful. I mean, obviously Watson had lost at the highest level, so you know, in Eubank's mind, it was like, well, you know, I'm going to beat a guy who you know, he can't beat a champion. I am the champion. I'm going to beat him, and it's the overall sort of sheer cockiness of how he was going into the fight. But for Watson, as you said, he was more well-mannered, well-spoken, and you could tell his mind was on the job. He wasn't drawn into the mind games 100% for this one, and it was quite evident when we come into the fight that he didn't really let all the outside antics get to him like some of the other opponents of Eubank. Like, you know, in Ben, for example, the year before, you could tell Ben had let that get to him just a little bit. The fact that he was really pushing to try and stop Chris Eubank in that fight, which ended up leading him to gas out a little bit in their particular fight. So this was Michael Watson, who was coming here cool, calm and collected after being at the highest level, losing at the highest level, and coming back and learning. And that was the biggest thing, that when you watch the Mike McCallum fight and when you watch this particular fight, you can see how much he'd actually learned from that fight, as I was talking about a little bit earlier. So it was great for British fans at the time. It was great because obviously we had another British grudge match involving two of our own middleweights, which it's quite difficult to get that now. It's quite difficult to get 2 or 3, 4 fighters in the same division which all end up facing off against each other. I mean, the early 90s to mid 90s was fantastic for middleweights and super middleweights. All these guys were around, all these guys were involved in big fights. People like Steve Collins, Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank. Obviously we've got the early Watson fights as well. So it was really great to get another great British grudge match going into this. So the fight itself, man, where do you want to start? Because there was 2 fights of Michael Watson and Chris Eubank, and we'll talk about the second one a little bit later on. We won't touch too much on that, but we will talk about it. But this particular fight, you always said to me, this was the better of the fight. Do you still stand by that?
I do, yeah. I liked the second fight. I enjoyed it. I just felt this was, I don't know, it was just had a bit of an edge to me, for me. And I felt that because Chris Eubank overlooked him maybe as well, we didn't realise how good he was. And then when he actually fought in the second time, he had actually improved. He had taken a lot from the first fight, Eubank. But I still just think this is the one that gets it for me. And it was obviously the tragic events that happened in the second fight. I mean, it's difficult to not talk about that. But you know, the fact that it was still a good fight, and I think that gets overlooked, the fact with everything that happened. But it was very significant, the second one. Probably it was a lot more significant than the first because it changed boxing. It changed boxing completely. But yeah, for me, I just enjoyed the first one. I thought, you know, Eubank started really well, and then Watson came back, and that was basically the story of the fight. Obviously, a lot more happens than that. But you know, even just the ring entrance, obviously Eubank coming with 2 simply the best and flying over the ropes, his usual sort of hurdle over the top rope he would do. No music getting cut off for this one, like we had in the Ben fight, and even literally from the point the bell rang, Eubank just stood there like a statue. He waited for Watson to start coming over to him in the corner before he then decided to glide around the ring in that unorthodox style, that crab-like style he always had. And just literally from the off, he was targeting the body. So he had obviously watched the Mike McCallum fight, and he's in his head straight away thinking, I'm going to work the body and then eventually I'm going to get rid of him like Mike McCallum did. Didn't quite work out that way, but that was the initial stage for Eubank. He was straight, sort of it was quick right hands, but mainly left hands to the body, little jabs to the body, clearly trying to exploit the vulnerabilities of Mike McCallum and use to dispatch Watson in the world title fight. But Watson looked more relaxed. He wasn't sort of agitated by Eubank and what he'd done previously. There wasn't too much involved in the build-up. So he was just going into the ring to do his job, and it was just another opponent for Watson. And he just looked really nice and calm. His shoulders relaxed, whereas Eubank was really stiff, but he was always had that sort of stiff style anyway. But you could see he wasn't as relaxed as what as what Watson was. But yeah, most of his shots were just out of range for me with Watson in that first round. But it was a good opener, and obviously Eubank took a while to return to his corner while he just sort of strutted around the ring while Watson went back as you would, and he took a little while for him to eventually go back to Ronnie Davis. But again, that is Eubank, just a showman, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was, and that first round was quite surprising to me, because when watching it back, you see Michael Watson, he tried to command the centre ring. He was the one that was pushing the action throughout this round and a lot of the rounds, which we'll push on in a bit. And for me, Chris Eubank I was surprised by the tactics that he'd adopted for it, given the fact that he was calling Michael Watson a limited opponent, and yet he started on the back foot and he's trying to pop the jab off and he's trying to throw the odd pop shot here and there into it, but Michael Watson's trying to sort of work his way in. He's trying to cut the ring off, basically, going into that first round. I mean, there was some good exchanges between the two of them, but it was more of, I would say, a scouting mission in that first round for both men. It was more of a way to understand what the tactics were from one another, and you get that in a lot of big fights like this, where you'll get two guys where you think to yourself, you've been really excited to see the fight, and the first round comes and the bell goes and you think, you're right, let's have it, and then all of a sudden you just get them sort of really tentative, not throwing too much, but throwing the odd shot to obviously try and win the round. And that's what this was. This first round was very much like, what are you going to do? Who's going to feint first? Who's going to throw that first shot? And as the round went on, you could see Watson was starting to push the action a little bit. And again, it was a difficult round. If you were scoring the fight, you must have had an absolute hell of a job of a time trying to score it, because this particular round, the first round, it was so difficult to score because there wasn't really a lot in it.
You could go even with it. I actually think the guys that are on broadcasting it, I actually think I think someone actually gave it a tied round, but I could see why. I literally, for me, I don't know why I give it to Eubank. I suppose I watched it a couple of times. I just felt that Watson was just out of range slightly, and Eubank, as you say, he was just sort of basically counter attacking. Everything was a counter punch, and they were just feeding each other out. I mean, you could go 10-10. Again, I always go back to the point that Eubank was the champion. He could be a little bit more reserved, whereas Watson needed to be a little bit more on the front foot and try and find that range. But he weren't close enough, and Eubank was clever enough to keep his distance. So that's why I would give the first round to Eubank. But I mean, even moving into the second, there were no clear punches landed apart from a left hand from Eubank, who continued to just counter Watson for much of the round. Watson was obviously on the offensive. He was the one trying to force the fight. So some people may look at it and think, actually, well, Watson's trying to, he's putting the pressure on. He deserves to get the round if there's nothing clean. But for me, Eubank just, again, he avoided a lot of his shots. No one really caught anybody apart from this one particular left hand that I noticed from Eubank. So pretty much the same in the second.
I think what was the telling factor in this fight as the fight goes on, and you might feel like I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm just trying to give people a bit of an understanding of if you've not watched the fight as such, or if you have watched the fight, what we was interpreting when we watched it. So what I interpreted from the opening few rounds of the fight was that, as I said earlier, Michael Watson was the aggressor, Chris Eubank was the counterpuncher, but the difference between the two of them in them early rounds was that although Michael Watson was pushing the action, and judges can see the aggressiveness and sometimes do score it based on the aggressiveness, even if they aren't landing a lot of shots, or if a lot of shots are actually landing on the gloves and the arms or the elbows, when Chris Eubank did throw his shots, they were really accurate, and when they landed, they really landed. So it was a case of the accuracy of the punches from Chris Eubank was spot on, whereas from Michael Watson, for me, it was more about, I'm going to try and hustle you, I'm going to try and throw a few shots in and look the busier fighter in here and try and, put my authority into this fight. But from a judge's perspective, obviously they're interpreting things in a different way, and it's something we'll talk about as the end of the fight comes, about how the scorecards went down and how it all ended, of course. But for me, it's early rounds interpreting it was like if you're a judge, you're either going to go off the aggressiveness of Michael Watson or you're going to prefer the counter-punching, more accurate shots of Chris Eubank. And I felt like that was what it was like during the course of the first 3 to 4 rounds, because they started to get a few more significant shots being landed from Chris Eubank. But again, it was just, I didn't feel like the output, from my perspective, was as much. So it felt like when you watch it, you feel like Eubank's not doing enough here, but Watson's the one that's pushing the fight. And that's how I felt throughout the majority of the fight until the second half of the fight came, which is where I started to feel Eubank started to understand that he needed to put the pressure on. But just jumping back to them earlier rounds, did you feel like watching the fight it was a case of that? Did you feel it was about the fact that the aggressiveness from Michael Watson was what was pushing the fight?
Yeah, I completely get your point, Sean. It is really difficult to judge it, because obviously with Watson being the aggressor, he's obviously throwing the more shots. Eubank being a counter puncher, it really is what sort of style you like. And even Jim Watt mentions it sort of in and around sort of round 7. He actually brings up that interesting point as how do you score? Do you score for the aggressor or do you score for the counter puncher? In those early rounds especially, they are tough to call, because obviously Watson is the one closing the gap. He is, but at times I just felt it was a little bit too far out. It was a little bit out of distance. Although he's throwing shots, he was landing a few times. I just felt that Eubank was a little bit more elusive, and he was able to just find the cleaner shots. And I think that for me nicked it. I think personally that was why I went with Eubank sort of with the first couple of rounds. But yeah, it's tough, isn't it? It depends. I normally prefer the aggressor. That's just the way I'd like to see a fighter put the other guy on the back foot. But, credit to Eubank, he obviously sensed that he ain't going to go there toe-to-toe with Watson. Not necessarily because he's got a poor chin, because one thing he hasn't got is a poor chin. He's got a granite chin. But maybe he just felt that he needed to reserve his energy himself, because he knew that Watson will continue in the same vein every single round. So it's a tough one to call. I prefer the early work, the first couple of rounds from Eubank, the counter punching with the cleaner shots, as opposed to Watson being the man closing the distance and trying to close the distance and being the aggressive fighter.
So as the middle rounds come around, then we're talking say 5, 6, 7, 8. For me, it's starting to pick up a little bit more in terms of excited fans and excitedness of us. Really, when I watched it, I was like, I have seen the fight before, but watching it back again, I was like, I'm excited to see, because obviously I know this is where the fight's starting to really hot up a little bit now, because Chris Eubank is starting to unload a little bit more now. He is throwing more combinations in. For me, it was like he was using the old Sugar Ray Leonard tactic of, he was letting Watson sort of trying to work, but then towards the end, say the last minute of the fight or the last minute of the round, he was then starting to throw the combinations in on Watson. But I think it was round 5 or round 6, there was a shot that Watson threw, which was absolutely the same shot which Mike McCallum threw on Watson. So he actually learned that screw shot up the middle to the body from Mike McCallum, and he'd implement it into the fight with Chris Eubank. He landed a really good body shot in the fight, and I thought it was like, wow, as he really just learned to do that and use somebody else's shot on a guy that wouldn't have expected to see it coming. But it was a great shot. He landed it. It was a great shot, and the commentators alluded to the fact that I'd done that and he'd learned that from the Mike McCallum fight. But this is where Eubank for me started to come back into the fight in terms of his output. He started to land more punches. His accuracy was still spot on. When he was getting through with one, he wasn't just leaving that one shot. He was then following up with 2, 3s and 4s, and that was what for me was starting to make the difference in the middle rounds of the fight. I felt like Watson then was obviously starting to get hurt a little bit more in the fight. There was a couple of moments where I felt in between them rounds where both of them had took some really good shots, but both of them had took them really well.
Oh yeah, they both did, and they both really started to, they at times now it was getting to the point where Eubank wasn't backing off as much, and as you say, when he was throwing his jab, he was following it up with 2s and 3s. In the 5th round in particular, he had this blistering hand speed. It was a right hand that did really shook Watson to his knees, and it also brought a swelling on the eye early on for Watson in and around the 5th. But Watson also landed a right of his own, but Eubank again barely blinked. I mean, he was when he took these shots flush, it didn't seem to take any effect on Eubank. It was almost like he just walked through them. I think for Eubank, it was more to do with his ability and his fitness. Not in terms of it, not necessarily the shots. Obviously, the shots you're going to take is obviously going to take something out of you. But that it was more of a fitness thing for Eubank. I think maybe that's why he was so reserved in the early exchanges, because he thought he knew that what Watson's going to bring is he's going to bring this constant pressure. And even again in the fifth, the crowd were cheering on Watson when right at the end of the round, Eubank decided to sort of pose in the ring rather than go back to his corner again around the fifth, because he could sense that the crowd were really getting behind Watson now, because Watson had done well in the third and he had a good go of it in the fifth. And Eubank sort of thrived off of the crowd at times when they would boo him and he was getting jeered. That almost ignites something in Eubank, and he starts coming. He really starts to sort of want to prove that, rather than backing off, he's going to go for this now. But yeah, it was an interesting middle round, and it really did start going. The crowd starting to get behind the fight. And Watson was really just showing excellent footwork and good head movement, especially in the sixth. Watson was quicker to the punch than Eubank by this point. So Eubank is obviously, he's trying to turn it with the mental games now, because obviously Watson is now he's starting to get that joy. Where in the opening sort of rounds he was pushing it and being the more of an aggressive fighter, he was just, as I say, I keep saying, he was always just out of range for me. But then all of a sudden he's finding his range now. He's throwing a couple of shots himself, but in Eubank it was backing off, but then coming back with his own exchanges. And all of a sudden we've got this great fight now, as we're going into sort of in a championship round, if you like, when you go into sort of 6 and 7 and 8, it took its time. It was a slow burner, and I think they sort of filled each other out. And as soon as it got sort of like the fourth, end of the fourth and then into the fifth, that was when it really started igniting and becoming a really good fight.
Let's just take a quick pause just to give a shout out to the sponsors for BTR Boxing Podcast. It's Bear Attack Boxing, providing you with the highest quality boxing equipment that there is out there. And there's a specific product that I want to bring to your attention today. So, when you're training and you're going using the bag, or you're going doing a bit of sparring, one of the most key elements to that is having some high quality hand wraps. But there's also the inner glove as well. I don't know how many of you guys use the inner glove, but I prefer to use the inner glove when using the heavy bag or when using it for sparring. It's a lot easier just to get straight on, fits on quite nicely, really lightweight, get them on the inside of your gloves, they protect your hands. It's a quicker and easier alternative to hand wraps with the inner gloves. It gives you the protection you need. And it's got a wrist strap as well to allow you to make it as snug as you like, because it's really important to make sure they fit correctly, because you don't want to damage your hands. Bear Attack Boxing, I've got them on offer, only £6.99. So I implore you to get over there now and snap a bargain up. Go and get it on bearattackboxing.co.uk. High quality boxing equipment. The inner glove, only $6.99. Please jump over there, go and get it. It's a great deal, and they're just as cheap as what you can buy them on other websites. The quality isn't as great as, so please go and check them out. The inner glove, only $6.99. www.bearattackboxing.co.uk. Find them on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, at Bear Attack Boxing. Did you see in round 7, it's like a backhand, weren't it, that Eubank had threw and he'd caught Watson with, and obviously the referee, Frank Cappuccino, would have to tell him off for that. It was, I just seen he was like, you naughty little man, how could you just keep doing that and getting away with it? But one thing I will say about the fight overall, before we move on to towards the end of the fight, is that for me, the referee did an absolutely fantastic job of allowing the fight to take place and not being too involved in the fight. That was one of the things that has happened over the years in many notable fights that have involved British fighters, where they've not been allowed to work. Most notably Ricky Hatton versus Floyd Mayweather in 2007. Joe Cortez wouldn't let Ricky Hatton work in that fight, so he wasn't able to get the shots off against Mayweather. However, in this fight, Frank Cappuccino had allowed the fight to go. He'd allowed them to work when they did get close together. He weren't jumping in too quickly. But yeah, in round 7 he got he sort of threw that sort of backhand over the back. Well, it was over the back of his head really, and then as he sort of come over the top of his head, he sort of threw this little back fist into Watson's face, and obviously the referee was no, you can't do that.
Yeah, sorry, the referee was completely right to have a word with him, and he actually done that. He sort of caught him in a sort of headlock and sort of hit him on the top of the head in the first round as well, right at the end of that round. So it was naughty from Eubank. It was obviously, I think he was starting to feel the effect, and he knew that he just wanted to upset Watson's rhythm.
Yeah, and when they came out for round 8, Eubank came out the blocks absolutely flying. He just started to throw multiple combinations to the head, to the body, and you could start to see that he was really coming out of his shell now. It was like he knew he needed to put the pressure on. He knew he needed to start winning the second half of this fight. Although a lot of people, ringside observers, ringside press, at one point had actually had Eubank up by two or three rounds, whereas the commentators openly said that he was having it really, really close. It was sort of more pushing a draw at this point of the fight.
I think I'm tend to shade for Watson. Watson's jabbing beautifully. He's being more aggressive. What he needs to do is to be more aggressive. He give Eubanks too much time to relax and pose. He should be all over Eubanks. He give him time to do what he want to do.
Do you think Watson's strong enough to last the distance out?
That's the question mark in my mind at this point. Eubanks took fresh at this point and was strong in the fight, going up the 7th round. Watson's doing all right, but he don't look as strong. Look like he's weakening.
But yeah, as that 8th round commenced, it was where a lot of the good action came for both of them, because Eubank really at this point was unloading different shots. He was throwing uppercuts off the back foot. He was throwing them body shots. He was really sort of trying to push. Well, he was trying to go to work on Watson, but Watson weren't backing down, and that's what I really enjoyed about the both men in this particular fight. Is that no matter what happened, both men would not really take much of a back step as the later end of the fight came. In the first half of the fight, you had Eubank, who was the slick counter-puncher, who was working on the back foot, but the second half of the fight came, he was a lot more aggressive. This 8th round in particular was quite a notable one for me, where I felt like, Eubank was really starting to throw shots from all angles, some wild haymakers over the top at one point, where it was very wild at this point. I think he was starting to, like I say, he was starting to understand that he needed to really put the pressure on and basically make sure he was winning this fight.
He's landing, he's stepping in a bit closer now, Watson, didn't he? As you've been saying early on.
That's what he has to do. He has to put this man under a little bit more pressure. If there's too much space between the two of them, that suits Eubank. Watson's going to have to move in and throw punches in 2s and 3s.
Going from there into sort of the 9th and 10th rounds at this point, again, it's the action's just brilliant. I mean, it's really toe-to-toe stuff at this point. So you've got both men coming forward. You've got Chris Eubank throwing some unorthodox shots, but then you've got Michael Watson really trying to throw these shots down the middle. A lot of Watson shots in sort of rounds 9 and 10 were sort of straight down the middle. They were like sort of underneath the hooks and the wild swings of Eubank. He was throwing these short, sharp body shots in there, and it was really impressive. And Eubank was trying to work on the body at the same time, because that's obviously one of the weaknesses that he picked up on from the Mike McCallum fight. So rounds 8 and 9 really, really impressed me. I really started to enjoy the fight at this point.
Yeah, round 8 was brilliant, and round 9, as you say, he did come flying out the blocks, didn't he, Eubank? He literally ran from his corner to Watson's in that round, considering the difference from the first, where he just sort of stood there like a statue. So he obviously knew in his head that Watson's is coming back in this fight now. And as you pointed out, for the guys that sort of had Eubank up, I had him up, but sort of going into the 8th, I had him a round up. So, for me, I thought Watson won the 8th round as well. So it was even. I had it even at that point going into round 9. But yeah, it was a good flurry from Eubank. Watson took any of the shots that sort of got through. Eubank, as you say, missed with that wild left hook, which was, he went for everything, because he was really sitting down on his shots, Eubank. He was really trying to sort of hit him with that one shot to rock Watson. But at times he was still he was mixing it up. He was throwing rights and lefts, and then on the bell, particularly on the 8th, Eubank lands the right hand right on the bell at the end of round 8, which did, you could see it took effect on Watson.
Eubank now, without really throwing punches, just moving in, stalking him and forcing him into making some mistakes. Eubank's looking for deep breaths now.
Yeah, you see, it's for the first time that Eubank actually using his feet to get away. There he goes again, a little ring of roses there, the way he goes in circles.
See, Eubank never sustains punching, Reg, so sometimes when he throws 5 or 6 punches, he's out of breath quick and he goes for a rest. He probably trains the same way he fights, he doesn't sustain the action.
But in round 9, I think it's Ronnie Davis that actually knows that Watson's clawing his back. This is even. I think he probably himself maybe Watson up a round, or he had it even himself, because as he come out for round 9, he actually, just before the clip goes in, on YouTube, you don't get everything as such. I think the cameras might have been on Watson, but as it flicks over to Eubank, as he's about to come, you see Ronnie Davis just give Eubank a massive slap round the face. Like for some proper old school shit there. And so Eubank, literally, obviously, he understood that, he needs to go for it now. And so he started the round literally sort of on the front foot, if you like, trying to push Watson back. And then as the round goes on, Watson's just too strong, and he looked more fresher. And all of a sudden, Eubank starts to slow, and he starts to reduce back. So from the point where Ronnie Davis is telling him now, he's getting him zero, you need to get on Watson. He's tried, and obviously he started to blow a little bit, and that's when Watson sort of now he feels a bit more confident. I think he notices that Eubank's flagging a little bit, and he actually, but in saying that, Eubank comes back with one of them pot shots, lands a left that hurts Watson. It's a wonderful shot. Before another left, it was followed by Eubank again. So I suppose what you're starting to get to the point now, especially in round 9, where Eubank starts throwing these pot shots, sitting down on them, and he does follow through sometimes, and they're hurting Watson, but Watson's coming forward every time. And he begs, you've got to ask the question is, like we're saying, do you go with the aggressor or do you go with the counter-puncher? In round 9, which I found interesting, was you had Eubank throwing the heavier shots, but then you had Watson throwing more shots with jabs and right hand. So how do you judge that? Do you judge, is a power shot stronger than if you're hitting a guy with jabs? Can you see what I mean? I don't quite, it's difficult, because people, when they use sort of the punch stats, for instance, and I always say I'm not really keen on them, because one sort of heavy shot, which you can consider a power shot, is that count as free sort of jab? You know what I mean? So it's weird. I mean, I give the round to Watson because I felt that Eubank was missing a lot, and when he was in range, but Watson continually walked him down, and he basically dominated him for a large chunk of that round.
And then we moved into round 10, and to be honest with you, round 10 was much more of the same of 8 and 9. It was very much, both men they had the moments of succession, they had the moments of aggression throughout the fight. Really, really close knit. Some great uppercuts on the inside from Eubank, some great body shots again. He was really trying to wear Michael Watson down at this point, and it started to make me feel like maybe Eubank and his corner felt like this was where they were going to take the fight, in terms of they were going to get him late, they were going to stop him late, they were going to try and beat the sort of wind out of him, with all the body shots that they were throwing on him. They were trying to beat the fight out of him, essentially, is what they were trying to do. But Michael Watson, much to his credit for this particular fight, he continued to exchange. Whenever Eubank threw 1, 2, 3, 4 combinations, Michael Watson's still there. He still comes straight forward, trying to get straight under the jab, throw the body shots in, and it was exciting to see a fighter just not backing down. Exciting to see a fighter, he wasn't fazed by anything, and that was what was the most impressive about this particular fight. Is Watson, although he'd had that heavy defeat to Mike McCallum, he wasn't fazed by Eubank, and whatever Eubank threw, he would throw back, and he would stay with him all the way through the fight. And round 10 was another exciting round, but for me, I think the round of the whole fight in particular, I don't know about you, but my round of this whole fight was round number 11.
I enjoyed 10 and 11. I thought they were both excellent rounds, really excellent. Just the way Watson continually just grinded Eubank down, and Eubank, you could see he was exhausted by this point. If you think of a computer game, if anyone remembers the old boxing computer games, when your stamina goes and you've got literally nothing left in your stamina box, and then all of a sudden you have to back off and retreat while your energy slowly pipes up a little bit, so you could just get enough stamina to throw another couple of shots. And that was basically what Eubank was in that situation. He was so exhausted that he was having to back off and retreat just to get the wind back in his lungs again, so he could throw another flurry if possible. But you know, Watson just kept coming. He kept grafting him down. You know, he was looking for the pot shot, Eubank, and the trouble is, everything he did, he looked like he was going to fall over with exhaustion. And it wasn't even a matter of if it was going to be a Watson punch. But you know, and that was quite notable in 10 and 11. Obviously, the 11th round was another. It was a brilliant round. Eubank was exhausted. He was missing right hands, and he went to throw a right hand, and he hit the deck. And the crowd cheered, and then the referee says like no celebration, and then Watson just puts his hands in the air, and then you hear the whole crowd just cheer because they're loving it now. They're getting right behind Watson, and Eubank looks like he's ready to go. You could, if Watson could connect with a nice combination, it was a good chance that Eubank could have gone in that 11th round, and it's an excellent round. Eubank tries to work behind the jab as well. Finally, where that's where he's probably trying to just get his rest, to sort of just keep Watson off of him. Eubank's stunned Watson though with a left hand, and he went to finish the fight. But because he was so exhausted, he went to go on the assault and the offensive, that he actually tired and he had to step back. So it wasn't even that. It was a peculiar thing where where you think Watson's he's in trouble now, but Eubank he just never had anything in the tank. So he threw about 3 or 4 flurries, and then all of a sudden you see him just back off, and then Watson just comes forward again. It was really strange to watch, but it was brilliant. I mean, I loved the 11th round. It was just great. It was fantastic to watch.
It was, and that early start to the round where you were saying about Eubank throwing that right, completely missing, he actually tripped over Watson's foot. Obviously, they were clashing in terms of the way the feet were, the way the footwork were. He actually fell over Watson's foot, and the referee was obviously waving it away as a slip, and obviously the crowd were cheering, thinking it was an actual knockdown, like a puncher connected, but it didn't happen. Eubank had threw this wild shot and eventually got his foot caught on Watson's foot, tripped over, landed on his ass, and then obviously the crowd's cheering like mad. But going back to what you were saying about the end of round number 11, that was really exciting. That was the part that was exciting for me of this fight, is when Eubank, he sort of traps Watson on the rope, starts to unload a flurry of punches, but all of a sudden Watson just turns him around, gets him back to centre ring, starts throwing the jab down the middle, starts to work the body again, and it's just as you say, it is back and forth action, and a good old Matthew Macklin saying it's ebb and flow. It's ebb and flow this particular fight. It was really like all the way through round number 11, and as they got to the end of the round, you could see how exhausted both men were. Eubank's just leaning on Watson at the end of the round as the last sort of 20 seconds are there, and then he's taunting him in, he's telling Watson to come in, and then he's trying to sucker him in to throw body shots in, which is what he was trying to do in that 11th round. He was, like you say, he was trying to finish the fight, but you could see he was exhausted, and he was taking steps back here and taking steps back there, and then obviously we get the end of the round, and then we come out for the 12th and final round, and again it's just the whole fight was fantastic, and the 12th round was just testament to how close this fight was. And at this point, going into the 12th round, Barry McGuigan on commentary for one of the broadcasts was saying, I've got this a draw. So at this point, there's quite a few people that were saying they had it a draw. One of the other commentators, I couldn't figure out who it was, but they were also saying they've got it a draw. And then the main commentator was saying that the ringside observers and the press actually had Eubank 2 or 3 rounds up at this point. And I think it was McGuigan or the other guy was saying, no, that's not right. And it was just like, they all essentially wanted Michael Watson. It felt like it was a very biased Michael Watson commentary, to be honest.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, it was a funny round, the 11th, because again, I mean, I gave to Watson, but yet Eubank, when he did find that energy to actually sort of go on the attack, he was hurting Watson, but there were just too and far and few between, if you like. So Eubank would start, he had a good go at early exchanges, and then dropped off, and then Watson would come back, and then he would come back again. But what Watson for me was doing was, as I say, he looked like he could put Eubank away because he was just out on his feet. So it was a close round to score. I mean, I went with Watson, so that effectively for me it won Watson the fight. So going into the 12th round, he didn't even need the 12th, in my opinion. But again, if you give that to Eubank, it's draw. And then you go into that well, you're going into that sort of last round where Eubank would need the round. But again, I mean, the one thing about the scout, and he starts circling Watson on his toes, sort of just throwing about, and he actually looked like from that little rest he had, he's like got his second bite of energy, and he was back out, he got his second wind. But Eubank kept up a decent work rate in that last round. He was throwing some of his shots were just getting through, and he put his hands up at that point as well, I think, to celebrate it, and the fans booed. So it's just interesting how, they were all Watson. I mean, not only were, I think the commentators were fully pro Watson, I think the crowd were, and I think everybody felt that this is the night that Eubank's going to finally get beaten, and it'd be interesting to see how he recovers from it. But another good round in the 12th. I think they were both exhausted by this point, after that round 10 and 11, which were excellent rounds. I think you could give them that, can't you? They were both cream crackers. So never much really happened. There were some exchanges, but it was a difficult round to score, that last round. I think a few people went Watson, a few people went Eubank. I ended up giving it to Eubank. I don't know if that's because I had him down by a couple of rounds by this point. So for me, Watson won the fight. And then, funny enough, a lot of people did feel that. I think even if you're not scoring it, I think when you watch the fight, I think Watson deserves it. But yeah, not quite sure what them judges say, because I don't think Eubank was up as much as they said they did. Eddie was, sorry.
Well, what was interesting about this particular fight, that this fight and the panel of judges were all foreign. Not one of them was English. We had 2 American judges, 1 Puerto Rican judge, and 1 American referee, which is something I don't think we see a lot of. Even today, in the big fights we get today, we do always end up seeing, like, say like Canelo fights, an American fight like Danny Jacobs recently. He had, like, there was a Mexican one and an American one, and whereas this was just completely stripped away from any sort of hometown decision, really, because you had 3 independent judges, 2 from America, 1 from Puerto Rico.
Judge Carlos Colon scores the contest 116 points to 113 points in favour of Chris Eubank.
So Eubank gets the first one by 2 rounds. That's the Puerto Rican judge.
Ladies and gentlemen, Judge John Rupert scores the contest 114 points to each boxer. A draw on John Rupert's card.
Draw by the Miami judge. Oh dear, Watson doesn't like this.
Ladies and gentlemen,
he keeps the title.
Judge Arthur Laurie scores the contest 115 points to 113. The winner, and still the WBO champion of the world, Chris Eubank!
Tim and I did disagree with that, but there you are. You watch from home, you may have a different version.
And the scorecards came in at 115, 113 to Eubank, 116, 113 to Eubank, and then 114, 114 a draw, which made it win for Chris Eubank. So it felt like, for me, this particular fight should have been scored. I'd probably say the draw was probably the correct decision. If I'm really being sort of critical and really critiquing it in that way, if I was scoring it, I'd probably say the draw was probably the most accurate of the 3 cards, because I felt like it was a tale of 2 halves in some respects. I felt like Chris Eubank, he dropped a lot of rounds in the first half of the fight, but then as the second half of the fight came, he started to pick up again and he started to land a lot more accurate shots. And I suppose it's a case of what you like, and obviously the judges in this instance seen that Eubank had won. Well, at least 2 of the judges had seen that he'd won by a couple of rounds, so he gets the victory and obviously retains his title. But the body language at the end of the fight was quite interesting, because when the bell went, Michael Watson's sort of arms up, jumping around. Eubank sort of got his arms up, but it's kind of just like he's just doing it to sort of save face, really, just say, oh yeah, I have won, but in deep down inside he probably knew it was really, really close and he could have lost that, and that's what was justified enough for them to eventually go on to have this rematch a couple of months later. But yeah, I did feel like a draw was probably the right decision for me.
I think that was probably, as I say, you could have given a few rounds to Eubank where I went Watson. It could have been a draw, and it would have been probably a fair result. Interestingly though, the commentators did keep mentioning the fact there were 2 American judges and that the Americans normally prefer the aggressor. So
yeah.
I think they sort of felt that Watson was going to get it because of the two judges were Americans. So I think they were quietly, they were actually surprised that it went in Eubank's favour. I think the one from Carlos Colon, he gives the 1-1-16, 1-1-13. I don't quite get that one. I think the other 2 I get completely, but even Archie. Art Lurie, what his name is, he won 115, 130, and that was what I had. So I suppose you could have gone either way of that. I think the 116 was a little too much, but probably John Root probably got it back with the 140, 114.
So going into the aftermath, obviously this warranted an immediate rematch. A lot of the public felt like Watson actually should have won this fight, and automatically it ended up being a rematch, which this show was actually promoted by Barry Hearn, father of Eddie. This particular show, Eubank promoted by Frank Maloney, who's now Kelly Maloney, back then as well. So it was a rematch that was easily made as well, and what made it bigger was because it was very sort of, in a lot of people's eyes, it was controversial. People felt like it was the wrong decision to have made, so it ended up going to White Hart Lane, the home of Tottenham Football Club, or was the home of obviously Tottenham Football Club. It went to White Hart Lane, and it was a much bigger match, and it was, for me, it was sort of shades of what was going to come a couple of years later when we had the big Ben and Eubank rematch at Old Trafford. It felt like this was kind of testing the waters a little bit for what was to come in the future, having it at a football stadium like that, a big event in the UK. And obviously, the rest is history really with it. We touch on the aftermath, and we touch on the second fight, and Eubank obviously won the second fight, and he won via a TKO stoppage in the fight. Now, I think from what I remember about it, it was actually quite a brutal uppercut which he landed in the final round of the fight. So this went to our rounds, the second fight as well. And it was an uppercut that he landed in the second fight, and what he'd done is he'd hit his head, rocked his head back that hard that he ended up hitting his head off the corner, and it just completely sort of took him out of the game completely. And obviously what happened after that was really, really sad, because the Boxing Board of Control didn't have the right medical teams there, and I think he was unconscious for like something ridiculous like 28 minutes or something like that. I read somewhere it was at a ridiculous amount of time, put it that way, and that's what eventually caused the permanent brain damage to Michael Watson, and obviously subsequently left him being unable to see, unable to hear, unable to speak for a couple of years. The guy's an absolute warrior and a fighter, because he managed to fight back through all of that. He spent 6 years after that in a wheelchair, and eventually managed to get himself rehabbed to the point where he's now physically able to walk again. He's able to write and read and talk and see to a degree again, and that's for me, that was unbelievable. And that's what makes the sort of the tale of Eubank and Watson bittersweet in a way, because he was a fantastic fighter and his career was cut short, Michael Watson, and even though he lost this particular fight with Chris Eubank Senior, it makes you wonder what he could have, sort of fights he could have gone on to have in the future.
Oh, absolutely, and it was a tragic event. The fight itself, it was a good fight. As I say, it was always going to be overshadowed with what happened, and rightly so. But Watson did have Eubank down in the 10th round as well, and it was Eubank got up from that round, and then, as you say, in that 12th round, it was an uppercut, and he sort of pinged his head back, and he hit the corner or the ropes, whatever it was, which ended the round. Well, no, tell a lie, actually, that's not right. He actually managed to get up, but he was clearly shaken, visibly shaken. And then eventually, from an onslaught from Eubank, the referee stopped it. Not long after, obviously, Watson collapsed in his corner, and his condition worsened. Obviously, it was the delay in the medical care. There was no ambulance, no paramedics at the event, which, if you think about how boxing is today, that's just incredible. That it just beggars to be believed. But from what I'm seeing here, I don't quite recall what happened. I remember, I don't think were the cameras on. I don't think they were. I'm not quite sure. I don't like to watch this bit, but apparently he was attended to by doctors wearing dinner jackets who arrived late, 8 minutes late. Yeah, as you say, Watson, what he's gone on to achieve since then is unbelievable and quite remarkable. And it just shows you, that fighting spirit that Michael Watson has. And he was an absolute warrior and a trooper. And it is sad to see, because who knows how good what he could have gone on to achieve. And not only that, with Chris Eubank as well. Chris Eubank was obviously, upset with the whole situation, and he even says that he lost that finishing instinct in the ring. He just couldn't finish off fighters anymore. He said he needed to. He basically. He lost. He went to try and go for the decision. He would try and win a fight on the decision, and it's notable. You can look at his career and you can see that. So yeah, who knows? Between the pair of them, Watson could have gone on to do more, and I believe he would have with enough fight to. Maybe he could have gone on to fight Collins and Ben again. And Eubank lost that killer instinct. So not good for both fighters. The one thing it was good for is it changed the whole of boxing's landscape. We always made sure there's an ambulance available to every single event. In actual fact, every event that happens in boxing now, there needs to be some sort of medical presence there. So, in hindsight, it's helped. And other fighters have had their lives saved because of it. I mean, you've had Adonis Stevenson recently where he's managed to, we're not quite sure what's going to happen with him. I haven't really looked too far into it. But the fact that, he looks like with the quick, urgent care he's received, he's not going to be in the same situation as what Watson was. So there were lessons to be learned, and they did. They acted. The British Boxing Board of Control. They acted and reacted, and it made boxing a safer sport.
It certainly did make boxing a safer sport, and there's less and less of these incidents happening. We do know and we do appreciate what these guys put themselves through, and when you talk about an incident like that happening recently, obviously Chris Eubank's son, Chris Eubank Jr., was involved with a fight with Nick Blackwell, and that same thing happened. Nick Blackwell took a bit of a beating, not as much as what Watson took. I didn't think Watson took as much as what Blackwell did, but Blackwell took a beating, and obviously after that fight he collapsed. He ended up in a coma for days on end. He came out of the coma. Unfortunately, he foolishly decided to go and start sparring again, and ended up back in a coma, and then come out of that. And he's made a recovery to from all accounts to a very good degree. So he was very fortunate. But Michael Watson's journey has been unbelievable, and the fact that it took him 8 to 10 years to actually come back from that and to be able to live some type of normalish life was fantastic. And quite recently, he popped up on Twitter, and a lot of people felt like he was actually just a fake parody account, but in actual fact it is the real Michael Watson. You can find him. He's at MBE Watson on Twitter as well, and that was it was amazing to be able to actually understand that he's able to access social media and interact on social media, and he's doing a lot of signings of gloves, and he's speaking at a lot of events now, and it's really good to see that he's getting all that support, and not a lot of boxers get the same support as obviously what Watson's done, all those years later. When you think about it, he wasn't like he was the highest of profile fighters back then. He didn't actually win a world title. He competed for it twice, but he won a Commonwealth title. So it wasn't like he was, in a lot of people's eyes, this might sound pretty brutal, but it's the truth. He wasn't like a world, he never won a world title. So he never got to that upper echelon of being a professional boxer, because his career was cut short. But yet the support and love he got from everybody around has been unbelievable to see. And I'm really pleased to see that he's quite active and he's doing a lot of things these days. So in the aftermath of this fight, Eubank lost his finishing instinct, as you said. He went on to have his obviously big matchups with the likes of Nigel Benn in the future, obviously the Collins fight, and then Joe Calzaghe later on in his career. So as we've said earlier, he's been involved in a lot of great, fantastic fights afterwards. But again, this changed the whole landscape of boxing. This not just the first fight, but obviously the second fight, for the reasons afterwards, it changed the landscape of the sport for the better. Eventually, for the better. And I have enjoyed talking about this particular fight, because it's this first fight, for me was quite significant in terms of that middleweight division at that time, and what it meant for the middleweight division. And we had to touch on what had happened in the second fight, because it's only right to talk about this and openly talk about these things that happen in the sport. And God forbid it happens again to anybody else. But the thing is, it's these guys put themselves on the line for our entertainment at the end of it all, and some of them don't get treated in the right way, and some of them end up coming out of the other side of it. Unfortunately, Michael Watson was a guy that, after a massive struggle, uphill struggle, he came out the other side.
Yeah, and credit to him. I thought he'd done, as I say, it is remarkable what he's gone on to achieve, and he's got a Twitter account. That's brilliant. That's great to hear things like that. But yeah, that fight also, it opened the door. You mentioned it was at White Hart Lane. Later on, you had Ben Eubank at Old Trafford in front of 50,000 people. So again, it had obviously, it stemmed something. This first fight, the following on, and the fact that people felt Watson won, and it was, his second title fight, and he'd lost another, but unfairly, people felt he should have been the champion. So it ignited something, a bit like the Groves Frutch, if you like, where people felt that Frutch had shouldn't have won that fight, and Grove, it shouldn't have been stopped. So it's a similar thing, and they went on to fight at a bigger stadium, and then the roll-on effect is like a domino effect, where we get Old Trafford later on down the line with Ben and Eubank, and you get these bigger stadiums and bigger fights, which again, although the second fight had its tragedies, it also helped the sport to make it safer. And then you had the boom still there, where you want to still get in the fans that still come out to pay tickets to watch these guys. And that fight, also the first fight, was the last fight that Chris Eubank fought at middleweight. He finished his middleweight career at 28-0. So he was undefeated as a middleweight, and he moved into the super middleweight division. And as you know, he went on to fight some big names, and then obviously ended with the Calzaghe loss and Cole Thompson losses at light heavy. But brilliant career from Eubank. Unfortunate for Watson that his career was ended too early, and who knows, he could have gone on. Maybe he could have been like another Bruno and lost a couple of more title fights, but ended up eventually winning one, which I think he could have. The crowd would have loved that, and he had a big Arsenal following because he's a massive Arsenal fan, being from Midlands as well. So he always had that fan base there. It's just sad to see. Who knows what may have happened, but a great fight to cover, Sean, and I'm pleased that Watson is doing what he's doing, and long may that continue, and just it just shows, let's make the sport as safe as we can, and so we can enjoy it, and relaxingly. You don't need to worry about things like this happening anymore.
Well, I've got to say, although he didn't win a world title, for me he won one of the biggest fights which happened for him, which was the fight for his life, and that is worth more than any championship belt or any purse that you can ever get in boxing. So it's been a pleasure to speak about it. Really enjoyed it. So guys, if you've enjoyed listening to this episode, The Tale of Eubank versus Watson, please go and find us on social media at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter and BTR Boxing Podcast on Facebook. You can go and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. Please go on, subscribe, leave us a rating, leave us a review. It really, really helps. I bang on about it every single episode, but it really does, because we get notifications to tell us when we're hitting the top 100, and we've recently just hit the top 100 of the Sports and Recreation podcast in the UK, and we've even hit the top 20 in Argentina, funnily enough. So it's definitely worth doing for sure. So please go and do it. You'll get all the extra episodes on there, all the legendary nights, all the ones to watch. You've got the life and times of. You've also got some other new series coming up, and you've got new segments coming into play over the next few weeks and months. So please go and hit the subscribe button. Go and listen to all the episodes. Support us. Follow us on social media. We really appreciate it. Thanks for listening to The Tale of Eubank versus Watson.
And right now, Thomas Hearns is an open book for Ray Leonard. Backs up against the ropes.
This is one of the most unusual calls by a referee in the history of the sport.
The first loss. A tremendous victory.